Hi everyone, it's Nicole. Welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about doing a tree finish with the Liz Matthews Santa's Night Tree Stitch. This is going to work for any type of tree finish that you have for cross stitch, and it's based loosely on my quilted tree finish from last year. So I've got some backing fabric, a triangle shaped ruler, a rotary cutter, an erasable marking pen, and a spool and a dowel that I've already stained. This is actually a leftover from my project from last year. I am linking that right here in the upper right corner of the frame, or you can find it down in the description below if you want more in-depth information on those quilted trees. So I have left my stitch actually in a very large piece of linen, mostly because I wasn't exactly sure how much I needed to leave for my finish. I do have a little red stitch in the center of my tree, and before I cut anything, I am going to take a minute and get this kind of even. I don't need it to be perfect at this point. So I went ahead and cut down the linen. I left approximately an inch from that right side of the stitch. Now I'm going to take my finished stitching piece, and I've got a pressing cloth and my wool pressing mat. So my wool pressing mat, the pressing cloth, I've turned my stitch upside down, and I am gently ironing this without steam. I am not against steam. I know that they say you're not supposed to, but if you need it to get your piece flat, to each their own, whatever you feel like you need to do. Next, I have got some lightweight fusible interfacing. This is what I use for any time I need a lightweight interfacing for any of my cross stitch finish projects. And I'm not even cutting it very nice and neat, and you will see why in a little bit. But I want to go ahead and secure this to the back of my piece, but very quickly, I'm so glad I remembered, if you want to attach or sew anything onto your stitching, I would do it before the interfacing. It will be a lot easier. I want to sew on some little snowflake buttons. Now, these were not a part of the kit. These are something I bought from Just Another Button Company, or anywhere Just Another Button Company buttons are sold. I will link to anything I'm using down below. And before I sew them on, I decided I need to get my tree shape. One thing that I did follow from Liz's finishing instructions is we want the stitching of the tree to go through those outermost stitches along the sides. This Creative Grids tree ruler is so handy. I am not using it to cut down my tree shape like I did for the quilted trees. I'm using it as a sewing guide. So I am taking this heat erasable pen and drawing in lines. Part of the reason that I did the heat erasable pens to draw in my lines is that I will iron this again after I sew my buttons on very, very careful, or not, yes, very carefully, because I need to add the lightweight fusible interfacing, but I really need to see and keep my buttons within that stitch line. So, and that also gave me a working example. You can see I actually ended up drawing a couple of different lines to get them where I want them to go. Now, for me, I wanted to add, kind of my own touch or my own finish to this tree. And I wanted my tree to be a permanent finish. Now, if you watch my Flosstube where I show this tree, I do talk about how I secure it so that if I ever do want to remove it, I can. But we will talk about that a little later in the video. I am using some of the, I believe it's not whitewash. I can't think of what the white color. I still had floss left from my stitch, so I used whatever the white was to sew on my snowflakes. And I could have kept them only in the upper part of my stitch, but as I looked at the design and I laid everything out before I ever stitched anything, I really liked having multiple snowflakes throughout this design just to kind of help reinforce that feel. So I am going to do that, and I stitched those on. You can see all over. Really, really cute. Okay, now I'm going to flip it over, and now we will press the lightweight interfacing in place. And I do a press and lift. I'm not ironing. I'm just pressing it down to secure it to my stitch. It doesn't tend to move very well. It'll bunch up. I don't want to ruin my stitch at all. So you can see press and lift. And it doesn't have to be perfect because we will be sewing a tree shape and then cutting this down. I'm going to go around my stitches. I don't like to iron over my stitches, but I will sew around the edges. Okay, now that we have our interfacing, I'm going to go back with my ruler, and of course that did remove the lines. That's the only big bummer here, is that it did remove my lines, so I will have to redraw them, but that's okay. I don't mind taking my time with this step. So I'm going to draw my tree shape lines in. Now you will see I should have left more room up above my tree. That is my fault. We are going to make it work. However, and it does work, but if I was or when I do this in the future, because I have some other trees I want to make, I'm leaving more room up top than I did. Okay, now I'll also along the bottom, I left a 1/2 inch. I only need a 1/4 inch. You're going to see me adjust that, and I did leave it in the video if I'm not mistaken, because yeah, that isn't really going to work. I'm using this little marker here. It's what you use to put lines into a quilted project. I did it gently because I needed to give myself a guide so that I could redraw the lines on the back of my piece. Remember, I'm not using my ruler to cut this down. I'm using it as a guide. And then I actually found this worked best. So I drew my lines, and I'm going to fold and flip it over. And I was like, oh, yes, that's so cute. Okay, we're good to go. And again, I'm leaving that space down below. About a 1/2 inch, I think, is what I end up drawing in. But I'm going to decrease that. This was a trial and error project, and I like to really be upfront about that. And hopefully, if you want to finish a tree like this, it will inspire you as well to get out your supplies and play. All right, backing fabric. This is some Sweetwater fabric. It's a plaid. It is one of my favorites. I knew I wanted some sort of a decorative fabric. This is not the fabric that came in the kit. That was a solid red fabric. And I, again, decided to go a little different route. I went a different route with the fabric I used to stitch my piece as well. I kind of went rogue and just did my own thing. Again, I'm going to take a square ruler. It doesn't have to be perfect. I just need this square shape, and I'm going to cut myself a square of my fabric. I just have all of my fabric on bolts. My own little bolts of fabric in my craft room, and I do have those bolts linked down below as well, because I do get asked about those quite often in my Flosstube videos. Okay, so not perfect, but we just need these two pieces to go together. Like that. That looks good. I am going to pin now. Pin along where I'm stitching. And I am going to be generous. I really don't want things shifting. You can do whatever feels good to you here. When I don't want things to move, I am a generous pinner. So I know some people don't like to use pins, and you probably wouldn't have to use many or maybe even any if you don't care about your backing maybe moving around a bit. And I purposely didn't put any pins there in the center. So I did go over to my machine, and I'm going to start down at the bottom. And I need to put a different foot on my machine. I'm using the Juki TL2010. I will link it down below as well. It's what I've been using for all of my sewing for the past probably 2.5 months. And I'm going to backstitch there at the beginning. I want it to be very secure because that's where I'm turning it out. And then I'm going to turn around and we're just going to sew. We're sewing the triangle shape. I like to remove my pins before I get to it. I don't like to sew over them. That generally, I always seem to break a needle. When I get here to the top, I actually kind of have to do a little bit of a manipulation. Remember where I said I should have left more cross-stitch fabric, more linen, but I think that's going to be okay. So it's almost like maybe 3-4 stitches across the top and then back down to the other, or back down the other side and then down the bottom about 2.5 inches, maybe 2 inches looking at it. And then I want to back stitch again here. And that looks good. And I need to fix something that I didn't like, which does sometimes happen. Okay, now I am going to trim this down a little bit. And I just use my scissors. And the reason being, I want to turn it out and I want to look at it before I snip corners or make any permanent kind of changes. So here's where I'm turning it out. This is not the permanent turnout. This is also why I made sure and backstitched really well. I want to look at my bottom edge. Remember how, and I want to look up here at the top. I want to make sure I'm not seeing like any backing or anything. So I'm using my point turner very gently. Take your time with this. I know I've sped up the video, so you're seeing this in fast time, 2 times the speed, but I did take my time with it. Okay, I'm looking at it and I thought it looked good. I readjusted that bottom a little bit. When I am super happy with it, I am going to take my ruler. This is my favorite ruler. It's a 6.5 by 24. And I'm cutting 1/4 inch from my stitching line. This is going to give me really nice edges along the bottom as well. I want it nice and clean. And then I am going to take some scissors and I'm going to cut across the bottom. Don't cut through your stitching, but this is going to make turning easier. And up at the top, I am just trimming away a bit of the seam allowance to make that top of the tree even more crisp and clean. And now it's time to gently, gently turn out our tree. This is it's like a bamboo skewer. It comes in my polyester fiber fill, but if you have a turning tool, this is the time to use it. And I actually am looking at it. Yeah, I decided at this point, this is where I decided that is too much down at the bottom. I don't want to see that much linen. So I'm going to turn it back out. It's not a big deal. I'm going to double check it. And I purposely left this in the video because I want you to really see how you too can finish your stitches. I like to err on the side of caution. So I am going to go now and I am going to stitch. I'm going to make myself some little cheat notches and I am going to go back over to the machine and stitch on that line. So I did that off camera and I've double checked it. It looks fine. I'm going to trim off 1/4 inch from my new stitch line and we're going to have to re-notch our corners. I reinforced the corners as well when I was over at the sewing machine, and now we're going to turn out. And for me, this is perfect. So when I mentioned earlier that it's about 1/4 inch from the bottom, that is what the final ends up being. So I left about 1/2 inch and then I really made it much, much closer. This is probably one of the most important parts of the whole project, and that is gently turning everything out and getting your points as crisp as possible. I kind of just hold it between my fingers and gently push, kind of doing a little twisty motion. Once you have your tree, oh my gosh, look at that, how you want it to look, fold in those bottom edges where we have turned it out, and we want to get our ironing mat, our wool ironing mat, and we want to iron this really, really well. I've got my better point turner here, my or this little pink one. I have a pink and an aqua. I like these point turners a lot. I will link to these as well. Okay, I love it. So I'm going to very carefully kind of get those edges as crisp as possible, and we are going to iron our tree on the back. Iron, iron. Make sure these are folded in really well. And we want to iron that. Perfect. We are ready to start making our tree shape now, or filling our tree. I have my dowel rod and spool, and I'm going to stick that in the tree in that opening just like so. You could do this later. I have found though, I don't like trying to stick it through the polyester fiber fill. I'm going to take it out just for the first part where I am stuffing the very tippy top of the tree. I don't like my dowel rod to go all the way up to the top. So we are going to work in a nice little bit of polyester fiber fill. You want to make sure you loft that fiber fill. That means pull it apart with your fingers multiple times. You don't want to just grab the polyester fiber fill from the bag and shove it into your project. That's going to give you a lumpy, bumpy finish. So in fact, I felt like I had too much in there, so I took a little bit out because I really want the top of my tree to be nice and firm. I don't want my dowel rod to go all the way up to the top. I want the polyester fiber fill to kind of stop it, if you will. I do like having a longer dowel rod in my trees as I find that it gives it a little bit of stability. And now lofting. Here's my lofting. Pull it apart with your fingers. Go with smaller little bits. I think that gives you a little more control. I'm going to fill all 3 corners first before I start filling around the dowel rod that is stuck in my tree. Would it be easier not to have the dowel rod in the tree? Yes. So, this is what I found worked for me. If you want to stick it in later, that's totally fine as well. I feel like I get a little bit better. I stuff in front and behind. And for me, this works really, really well. So that's kind of what I go with here. And I'm going to continue stuffing my tree. I want it to be nice and firm and plush. I did not find that this tipped it over. I probably would not fill this with poly pellets, which if you follow me and have watched any of my pillow finishing, I use a lot. I would not fill this with walnut shells or lizard litter. It's going to be heavy and very top heavy. Unless you have something heavy for the base to offset that, it will be top heavy and I think it'll topple over. Think about different things you can use for the base of your tree. Maybe you have some fun, metal flower frogs or candlesticks or whatever you want to finish with. That will make a difference. Spools and dowels readily available at most craft stores, Amazon, things like that. They're not going to be very heavy, which is fine because the top of my tree is not heavy either. It's literally a little fabric. There's nothing heavy on it. Polyester fiber fill is not heavy either. But if you don't have the dowel rod very far up in the tree, I also think that does make the tree a little top heavy. So that's why I like it to go pretty far in, and I keep most of the length. I think I maybe kept all the length on these particular dowel rods. But this, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, this one was pre-stained because I stained it last year. I had a few left over from my quilted tree projects. I went down to my bucket of leftover supplies and I was so happy to have this. I didn't even have to worry about assembling this part of it, and I just put my tree together. So really, really happy with this. I am going to be doing the Hands-On Design Christmas tree or 3. I can't remember what it's called. or is it Tree Farm? You guys, I can't remember. I'll put it across the screen. I'm going to be doing those in tree shapes similar to this. I'm also going to do prairie schooler trees like this. I have lots of trees I want to do to kind of help fill in my tree forest. I decorate my mantle with trees. I may have to decorate more places with trees. I'm addicted to making these. Liz Matthews has so many tree designs. She has like the 12 Days of Christmas. I believe she's on 8 or 9 right now. So if you want to do your trees like this is just another option for tree finishing. And I hope you guys enjoy it. I loved how mine turned out. Now, once I am finished stuffing this, I am going to take a little bit, I took my sewing machine thread, and we are going to stitch up the bottom of the tree to secure it. I did kind of a ladder stitch. I'm going to go right around that dowel rod to secure. So I'm going to clip this with some of my Clover binder or Clover Wonder Clips. I found like that gives me a little bit more security. I'm kind of one of those that likes pinning, and I don't like pinning, but I feel like I get better results with pinning and clipping. So I'm going to clip like so, and then we are going to stitch, and I'm going to hide my knot in those 2 layers. So here I'm just kind of trying to tuck it down in there. I'm going to remove a clip so I can get that tucked. This is not really going to be very visible, but I want it to be as neat as possible. So I did a ladder stitch. It makes the stitches kind of disappear. If you want to do a whip stitch down here, that's fine. If you want to decorate maybe with rickrack or lace or pom-poms or something along the bottom that's going to disguise your closure, that is another fun opportunity to embellish your tree as well. But we're just stitching. I know the way I have this and the way the dowel is, I had a hard time filming the actual stitching of this. So I hope that my explanation at least gives you an idea. It's literally just stitching it shut. And as we get to the dowel, I'm going to kind of go around it and come over the other side and stitch closed. This is another reason I would not do something like walnut shells or poly pellets that could come out. The polyester fiber fill isn't going to fall out, but there is a slight opening around where the dowel rod goes into the tree. You could secure that with hot glue or liquid glue if you want. I am going to be securing the back of mine with a little hot glue, not the front. If you watched my Flosstube, I did mention this. I did not glue the front of my tree in case I ever want to remove it. If I ever want to remove the stitch, maybe, I want to replace the fabric on the back, or I want to do a different stand, the dowel rod breaks, I don't know, something. I wanted it to be where I could remove it and not damage the stitch. If I need to resew it to another piece of backing and restuff it, that's one thing. But I don't want to restitch the tree, the part that took so much time. So I am only going to put a little hot glue on the back of the fabric to secure it so it's not just, spinning around making a mess. Now I just knotted that. I'm going to pull that through to the back, then the needle, and just snip that off to hide the thread. Oh, it looks so cute. I love it. And I'm just pulling any little strands, polyester fiber fill, any of that. Okay, last things. I am going to use the Chantal's 141 Design 3.5 bow tool to create a bow. I do have a bow making tutorial coming really, really soon that'll be real-time slow. I've shown it a lot, but she also has a video on her channel. This is some ribbon I've had in my stash forever. I believe it's Stampin' Up, but just a ribbon that matches my stitch. Oh, that's going to be so pretty. I'm going to go ahead and notch those ends. The final thing I'm going to do, if you watch my quilted tree tutorial, I wrapped some twine around the spool and secured it with hot glue. We are going to do this with this green kind of puffy, chenille type of ribbon. Again, I've had it forever. It is also Stampin' Up, and I just hot glue that to the spool. Then I did stitch a larger snowflake to the front of my tree to finish it off. And again, I'm using the same, I think it's Weeks Dye Works thread that I sewed on the other little mini snowflakes. And this is a different button. I will link it down below as well. It's escaping me. Buttons Galore, I think, is where I got this one. Maybe. But I will link that one down below as well. I like the size of this one. So once that's secured, I'm going to kind of wrap it around. I hid how I did my little knot in this one as well. You know, I don't want it to be super noticeable. I don't want a knot on the back of my tree or anything like that. There we go. Go through the loop, make a little knot. And we're going to snip off that excess, glue the bow to the front, glue the green ribbon, twine, whatever you want to call it, to the spool. And that is going to finish off the design. Just finish off all those little parts and pieces. And here is how it looks on my mantle. Thank you guys so much for joining me today for this tree finish tutorial featuring the Hello from Liz Matthews Santa's Night Tree. The supplies I used are listed and linked below the video here on YouTube. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel, click that like button, and don't forget to hit the notification bell to always be notified when I have a new Flosstube stitching or quilting video. Thank you guys so much for joining me today, and we'll see you next time.